We've got our lances built, the hex map ready, the mission all set. And the question is, when does a game of Battletech truly start? Now, I want a framework for a moment, pulling in some generalized wargaming tactics. I've been pushing that up to the Wargaming Tactics playlist. This idea that when I'm putting out my lances, before we get to deployment, I'm pulling out my toys out of my gaming case, my miniature case, and you're seeing what I'm bringing. For the battle value, there's going to be some sort of plan. There's going to be some sort of focus based on the mechs and the machines that I pick. Fritz has got 2 longbows, 2 LRM carriers, and a bunch of bulldogs. He's going to have a fire base with LRMs just raining down. He's got some Karnovs. He's got some warriors to act as spotters. Sometimes it's really obvious. Other times, not so much. But what is that narrative? What is the tactica where my opponent is going to be trying to do 2 things, and I'm going to be trying to do these 2 similar things. Every turn, I'm looking to advance the mission, win the mission, and I'm looking to reduce my opponent's forces by destroying units or immobilizing them, bringing that battle value down, so this way it makes it harder for them to win the mission. So we're looking at that. Then we get to deployment. Based on the map, based on my lance, based on what my opponent has, and based on the hex map that we've chosen or randomly put out, I'm going to have to try and do something, translate that into action. And deployment is where the game starts. Looking at different deployment options, so this way, turn 1, I can gain momentum. I can gain advantage, taking into account all of this to make winning the mission or to make destroying my opponent a little bit easier. Now we've got that Battletech framework. Let's look at kind of 3 deployments, kind of 3 standard deployments that I usually look to leverage on the table. If we're kind of talking about a generic hex map, if it's not something dedicated city fight, city tech, or some type of fortification that requires a different approach. But if there's these pockets of terrain and clusters of elevation and areas to move, this is kind of how I look at deployment. So the first is, in my deployment zone, I'm looking to push to the center of the table as fast as I can, kind of regardless of the lance or the toys that I'm bringing to the table. Now, obviously, heavies and assaults are going to be slower than fast and lights and hovers. Whatever that speed is, I'm going to try and advance to the center. I want to do this because first, it gives me somewhere to go. That's going to lead to the second possible deployment. It's also going to allow me the different firing arcs, this idea of the front, the left, and the right, to get the maximum out of that. If I dominate the center of the table, if I make it up there, and it's not always exactly center. Sometimes it's a little to the left or a little to the right because of terrain, elevation, a good place to be. That now gives me some place to go. If I start taking some damage, I make some tactical mistakes, my opponent gets some lucky hits, and I need to fall back, I've got somewhere to move to, as opposed to if I just kind of hang out in my deployment zone and say, look, I'll wait for my opponent to arrive. Now I have nowhere to go. So I want to have some of that built-in maneuverability. Now, naturally, if the dice gods are blessing me and the tactica is on point, I can push my opponent back. I will follow up. I'll move forward. Now, I'm starting to take some losses. Maybe I'm looking to move somewhere. At that point, if I have to go on the defensive, I'm going to want to castle up. And castling up deployment is where and castling up works for most wargaming systems. Not all wargaming systems. For most, just to sidebar for a moment, most wargaming systems, the tabletop, the hex map, the battle grid, whatever we want to call it, you can't voluntarily exit. You might retreat, you might take some losses, morale, whatever the nuances of the rules are. But what it represents is a snapshot of that engagement. You can't voluntarily leave. Yes, in Battletech, there's some units that can leave and come back. But this idea of if I castle up in the corner, so if it's the right side of the hex map, if I move all of my forces to that corner, I'm in the edge. Well, I was already taking losses and I need to back up and group up. What this means is now I'm funneling the areas of approach that my opponent can attack. And I'm limiting the fact that they can't approach, if I'm on the right side of the table, they can't approach from forward, left, or right. They can only come from forward or left. I'm castling up. I'm looking to funnel them in. Now, I'm also looking to push back out if I can reverse that, but I want to have somewhere to go. Now, let's also talk about the flank, the sides of the table, flanking and refused flank. So flank is where you rush something up the side of the table, could be left or right, again, modified by terrain and deployment. And the idea is I'm going to look to rush something past the center, all the way up the left side or the right side, get into my opponent's deployment zone, and outflank them, take them from behind. And again, a flank attack depends on the wargaming system. Some wargaming systems, I've got my infantry, and it really doesn't matter the direction they're facing. They can maneuver, they can move. So getting attacked from behind, it's not as valuable, let's say. Battletech, extremely valuable. Rear armor, side armor, rear armor on mechs, coming from behind. A lot of mechs, you bypass the entire firing arc, unless it's quick check. Mechs that have rear firing weapons, Dragon, Battlemaster, right? But if you can outflank someone and get a rear attack, not only is it less armor, it's less return fire. And if they turn to face me, if that Battlemaster turns to face me, or that Dragon turns to face me, well, it's got my other lances moving up. So flanking in Battletech, very, very important, being able to outflank. So this idea of I'm going to move up and try to flank. I'm always doing that, even if it's a little battle value. I mean, look, I'd love to have a huge battle group moving forward. But if it's a couple of warriors, if it's a couple of fast-moving hovers, if it's a couple of light mechs, annoying light mechs, or kind of a medium, that's outflanking is good. So a refused flank is where you say, look, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to allow that. So what you'll do is you will put something there. And again, look, whether it's effective or not, that's up to tactics, the dice. You put something there to stop, slow down, or at least force your opponent. They're not going to get that flank for free. Examples would be autocannon 20 tanks, might be an infantry swarm, something that they're going to have to navigate and get past. You could deploy your lances one center, one left, one right. That's one way to refuse the flank, to make sure they don't flank. Or if you want to have a battle group center somewhere, you put units to take care of that. I want to try and outflank, but I also want to have something in the center of the table. I don't want to cover the left side and the right side, being like, well, let me put something on either side. So this way, if they get outflanked, I'll have something to answer them for that. It's better, in my opinion, to have something that can move fast, sort of in the center of the table, the hex map, and can radiate left or right to deal with the outflank to deny it. That's the kind of the best use of battle value. So we've got 3 basic deployments, and I'm building this because we were talking about this idea of lists and attack, support, and defense with using Battletech and kind of building your lances. So now we're taking it to the tabletop. That's the deployment. I'm looking to center deploy. I'm looking to push forward. I'm looking to dominate. Things don't go well. It's never a withdrawal. It's a tactical redeployment. There is no retreat, but I can pull back to the hex map, castle up on one side. I look to get the flank. I look to deny the flank. I'm looking to create options which cycle back to this idea every turn. I'm looking to advance the mission, and I'm looking to remove my opponent's forces a little bit, as much as I can, so they cannot advance the mission.